Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about the North American Premodern Championships. This was a very cool, very big tournament that happened uh, 5/13, so just around a month ago. Yeah, this is going to be sweet. This was a really big IRL tournament at LobsterCon, which was somewhere on the East Coast. I can't remember. And it's real nice because it's an actual factual, real IRL tournament. Lots of cool people. Of course, everyone in Premodern, very cool, very interesting, nice people. So that would have been real sweet to go to. Such a sweet tournament. Looking at all the decks and seeing all the cool pictures people were posting on the Discord. Definitely pretty fun, pretty sweet. So I like that quite a bit. So we got today top 16, so top 16 decks. Going to be looking at those, of course, starting at 16 should be sweet. And yeah, so this is like an actual tournament, like a real Swiss style top 8, all that good stuff. So yeah, we'll get to see some pretty cool stuff, let me tell you. Oh man, oh man. So let's get started. All right, right off the bat, we got the zombie infestation, the squee plus zombie infestation plus um, all the weird sort of Icarid style guys like Ashen Ghoul and Krovik and Hor, guys that just keep coming back over and over. Um, and this is kind of like a mid-rangey, grindy kind of deck. You got Duress and Cabal Therapy, of course, to disrupt your opponent, Snuff Out to kill things. Sickening Dreams also kills a bunch of stuff. Buried Alive, of course, can tutor your ghouls and Krovikan horrors and stuff. Um, Also worth noting, this is a deck that cares about graveyard order. Yeah, that used to be a thing. What a yeah, what a weird thing. Anyways, graveyard order used to matter, and it does certainly in this deck with things like Krovik and Hor. So yeah, but yeah, main thing is just discarding Squee to zombie infestation and making a bunch of zombies that way. Obviously, Squee's very good with things like Mastercore 2 and obviously Sickening Dreams as well. So a lot of really cool stuff. Sideboards just got a lot of typical um, black cards that hate on things like Sickening Dreams and E-Plague against Go Wide stuff, Dystopia and Perish against green decks, Bottle Gnomes, of course, pretty good against just aggressive decks in general, but typically red decks. Bottomless Pit, of course, is a nice card if we're playing against control decks. So this is really cool. I'd definitely like to play with this at some point. I think they're trying to remember, there were like different kinds of these sort of decks before. I think this one's a little bit different. Like for example, it doesn't splash a color. I think a lot of the other graveyard zombie infestation decks did splash colors, but I like this one just mono black. Wasteland and Factory are great reasons to stay monocolor, and Curse Scroll too does some little burning as well as gives you outlets for your mana, which is pretty nice, late game. Pretty sweet, pretty sweet. So also Curse Scroll very good with Squee. So I guess that's some sort of level of synergy, right? If you discard all your Squeeze to Zombie Infestation, your hand will be full of Squeeze, and I guess if you have other cards in your hand, wait, I guess that wouldn't really matter, right? Because you can just discard the non-squee cards, whatever. Anyways, very cool deck, very interesting deck, and yeah, let's move on. All right, and number 15, we have elves. Now, this is basically just your typical elves list. I don't think I've ever brought to attention like Well-Wisher. It's a pretty sweet card. I can't remember off the top of my head if the elf decks always play Well-Wisher or not or whatever. But it's a great one of, and it's a great tutor target, especially with something like Anger, where you can activate it immediately, and you can put the game out of reach of the aggressive matchups, right? And of course, synergy with Quirion Ranger and Wirewood Symbiote is good. Or well, Wirewood Symbiote, right? Yeah. So, um, or was it Quirion? No, Quirion Ranger is the one that untaps creatures, right? Return a forest untap creature. Yeah. I'm getting my elf untappers mixed up. My bad. Um, anyways, Well-Wisher, very powerful card. Obviously not perfect, you know, because it against like the red decks, it just dies to anything, right? So it's not great, um, you know, early on. But like if they tap out or something, maybe you can sneak a Well-Wisher in to gain some life. Although again, with Lava Dart and things like Pyrokinesis and Mog Fanatics and stuff, even that can be hard. Anyways, also I'd like to bring up Sylvan Library. This is the card this deck doesn't play. Another card that obviously is very good with Well-Wisher, and this is another really powerful card. I think it's just great, just a great card to just draw a bunch of extra cards versus mid-range decks or control decks, you know. Definitely worth the 1-of slot. I like it quite a bit. It's just a really powerful card. It doesn't require any extra mana, so you can slam it down, draw a bunch of extra cards, which is quite good. And like I said, Well-Wisher can even fuel that. And they have this good synergy, right? Because the more cards you draw means the more elves you're going to have. And then Well-Wisher gains you more life, which means you can draw more cards, you know, so that's pretty ridiculous. Anyways, I think this would certainly be a card to certainly want to test out. Perhaps maybe these decks don't play it because they have Survival of the Fittest already, but Survival is rather mana intensive, and can take a little while to get anything out of it, especially if it gets disenchanted immediately. But yeah, so Sylvan Library gives you a little bit more robustness. Anyways, so I just thought that would be something to bring up because I don't think I've seen that before. But anyways, let's move on. All right, now we have Sly, and this is a very typical Sly list. Um, the deck's got a couple wiggle room slots. You know, sometimes it plays an extra land, so we got 21 lands here. Got a random Volcanic Hammer. Sometimes we see a pair of those. Main deck Vortex. Everything else is pretty stock. Especially sideboard, again, pretty stock there. So yeah, all good stuff that we're used to seeing. And yeah, there you go. That's Sly. All right, and now we have Welder Survival. This is a very typical sort of Welder Survival list, although I don't remember if they always play a Plains to fetch for, or they just play like 3 City of Brass or additional multicolor lands. But we have Thornscape Battle Mage in the sideboard. That's a sweet card, definitely one I'd like to bring attention to, and I just really like it. I just really like it quite a bit. Thunderscape Battle Mage, this deck doesn't play, but I just really like it a lot. I think it would be interesting. You know, it's like this is a pretty good tutor target, or to survival up. You know, you get some discard, can nuke enchantments, of course, and you can play the kicker with the City of Brass or Birds of Paradise or whatnot. So that's kind of neat. Yeah, I just really like it. Certainly something to consider. But yeah, this is a fairly typical Welder survival list. We even got the Spore Frog in the sideboard so we can frog lock aggressive decks. So very cool, very cool. Oh, I guess I should note the Mother of Runes as well. Yeah, so there you go. Yep, and this is the rock, and this is nothing too weird. We do have Plague Spitter in the sideboard as a 2-of, but no Living Wish to get it. But this is not that strange, since you know this is a card that often has seen play in the past. Living Wish or no in the sideboard for the rock, and yeah, it's very good against the green creature decks, right? Or just obviously most aggressive decks, although it can be a bit touch and go versus the red decks, just due to dealing extra damage to yourself. So that's something to keep in mind. But yep, pretty typical sideboard, pretty typical main deck. Yeah, we got that Croson Tusker. Oh man, I love Croson Tusker, so sweet. But yeah, there you go, there you go. All right, now we got something a little spicier. We got this Threshold deck, this blue-green-white Threshold deck. And we got some interesting stuff. Mother of Runes, of course, is here because without really any consistent access to free or super cheap counter magic, think like Daze or Force of Will in the older Threshold decks and Legacy. Mother of Runes is able to protect your threats, and of course, Mother of Runes is very good with Meddling Mage against fair decks and unfair decks, especially after board where unfair decks are bringing in removal like swords or Rushing River or things like that. So you can lock them out pretty early on with Mom onto Meddling Mage naming an important card. So that's really sweet. Yeah, we just see a bunch of super cheap spells, stuff that's not too strange. Miscalculation is really nice because, these tax encounters sometimes can be not that great, so you can just cycle it away, which is great because, you're able to cash it in for another card, whereas something like Mana Leak, you really couldn't. But yeah, and of course helping with Threshold too is pretty nice. So if your opponent doesn't play anything, you're just like, screw it, I just want Threshold faster. Mana base is pretty typical. Most of the other spells are typical. I just want to bring attention to Wax and Wane. This is a fairly common / accepted card, but I just like this card a lot. It's basically never dead. There's a lot of really important enchantments to kill. Of course, think Survival, Oath, things like that. Sometimes Engineer Plague, although Engineer Plague doesn't really hurt this deck for the most part. But yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. Lots of different targets it can hit, and of course it's never dead because you can just mini giant growth with it. Very cool. And sideboard is all pretty typical stuff, although I kind of like the idea against any sort of like dirtier mana hungry deck of playing like some number of maybe Armageddon or at least Winter Orb would have been nice because everything in the deck is so cheap. And Winter Orb and or Armageddon are pretty strong versus things like Landstill and stuff, which can be kind of difficult. Oh, obviously, speaking of Landstill, Wane on Wax and Wane also can hit something like Humility, another big bonus. But yeah, pretty sweet deck. There you go. All right, and now we have Elves, and this is a fairly normal looking version. This one also has Well-Wisher. I wonder if I've just missed this card every time, and it's literally stock in the Elves lists, but that's okay. We've got sideboarded Elvish Champion, which I think I've seen before, but yeah, if you're playing against like, say, the Mirror or other green decks, Champion is pretty good just for pushing through damage. Like, say, the Rock has a bunch of walls and stuff. You can, Elvish Champion and Alpha Strike, things like that. And speaking of walls, we have Wall of Blossoms. This card is sweet. I'm guessing he was thinking like, I need to find a decent way to shore up the aggressive matchup, and Wall of Blossoms is pretty good at that, being able to basically block anything sans shadow creatures, right? So should be, it's an interesting card. I wonder how well it worked out for Mr. Ol Raid. And yeah, side note, that's the same old Raid. I can't remember. I should note that a lot of these people are like old pros. Obviously Ol Raid is the guy that's on Sylvan Safekeeper, which is quite nice. So it's cool to see him, playing again. Or I guess he's always been playing since back in the day. But anyways, yeah. So just keep an eye out. We're going to be talking about some of these other guys too. But yeah, this is a interesting tech for this deck. So big fan of Wall of Blossoms. All right, and now we have Sly, except this one just has baubles. Yeah, that's nothing too strange. Although again, I always like multiple curse scrolls, especially since oftentimes people will bring artifact and enchantment hate against you. Things like Sulfuric Vortex are pretty brutal for the slower mid-range or control decks to deal with. So yeah, because that's just free damage and stopping all the life gain is quite difficult. So your scrolls get hit a lot. So I like 4 scrolls. But yeah, there you go. So nothing strange here. We do have the pillar in the sideboard. Pillar, I guess, if you expect something like the Mono Blue Storm deck or Allurman. Um, Pillar is very good against those decks, of course. And looks like he came ready for a lot of other aggressive decks with Pyrokinesis as well as Lava Dart. So yeah, there you go. All right, and now we have goblins, and this is pretty typical. Nothing too weird. 23 lands, 35 goblins, one main deck, Naturalize and Hearth Charm to hit artifacts. Um, Hull Breach, of course, is a really sweet card. Definitely gives you a nice 2-for-1 if you don't need the let's say the instant speed on Naturalize. Hull Breach is quite awesome at obviously giving you a 2-for-1, and so that's really nice. And being able to answer an artifact and enchantment on the same card is pretty cool. I don't really agree with playing all this artifact hate because you have 4 Naturalize, a Hull Breach, and 2 Null Rods. Like, not even if you don't count the Hearth Charms because they do other things, that seems really excessive. So I'm not sure I'm exactly a fan of that too much, but yeah, everything else is mostly standard, right? I mean, we have 61 cards, and again, it's a little, you can play 61 in decks with a lot of tutors and card draw and things because the reduced consistency you get from playing 61 cards is offset by the power of being able to tutor up a unique effect as a one of. So that there's some logic in that, but again, I typically you'd probably have to, even gun to my head, I don't think I'd ever play 61 cards in basically any deck. So anyways, yep, let's move on. Okay, and now we have Star Spangled Slaughter, and we see a lot of new sort of tech here. So instead of playing counter magic and a bunch of random draw spells and things like that, this guy attempts to go more proactive. So Future Sight, of course, is an extremely powerful card, and instead of having like just random things like cantrips and counter magic and things like that, which could obviously um, are going to be less powerful than something like Future Sight. They're obviously bad with Future Sight. So he takes all that stuff out, just relies very firmly on Future Sight itself to just gain card advantage. And everything is, even the Seal of Cleansing is in the deck with that in mind. Just be very proactive. So like even if Seal of Cleansing is dead at the moment, you can still cast it off the top with Future Sight. So that's pretty sweet. And so we just have very aggressive cards, things like Fire Ice Bolt, Swords of Plowshares, like which will typically have targets. I guess swords can be dead, but if you have a resolved Future Sight, it doesn't really matter if you have 1 or 2 or just 4 dead cards in your deck, because the decks those cards are going to be dead against typically are like the creatureless control decks, which really hate having Future Sight in play. So if you untap with it, it's just like, okay, I'm so far ahead, it's going to be very difficult to catch up. So that's interesting. And of course, most of the creature stuff is pretty typical. Silver Knight, I should say, not Future Sight. Silver Knight is very sweet against the red decks. I mean, it's not immortal because of things like Curse Scroll and Anarchy and whatnot, but it is pretty sweet against the red decks, which you can use a little help because your mana base is so slow and or painful. So a little bit of that goes a long way, so that's nice. In the sideboard, we have Dwarven Miner and Blast Miner, which are just there to blow up lands in the mid-range or control matchups, where those come down to mana battles or as well as things like manlands being important. As well as Aura Fracture, which is good against, well, obviously any deck with a lot of important enchantments. It's basically infinite demystifies, so that's cool. And then of course the rest of the sideboard is pretty typical, but I really like the sort of Future Sight switch, just going all in on Future Sight. That's a sweet card, pretty strong, and I like this sort of take, pretty innovative. All right, and now we have, well, this is just basically Sly, and we occasionally do see main deck lava art, and that's cool because it's a little bit of pre-boarding. So you open up a little sideboard space, and it's basically a shock at worst, so that's nice. So the baseline isn't too bad, and of course, like getting cards off it, like killing two um, mana dorks or just two weenie creatures is pretty sweet. 19 lands and 2 scrolls and 4 baubles. Um, that's a little unusual, or I should say the scrolls and the uh, 2 scrolls is a little unusual. Again, like I said, I don't like that. I think, and some people, I guess it's kind of split. I've seen people play 3 or 4, and then some play 2. Strange, but yeah, 19 lands. Again, I like 20 lands more, even with the 4 baubles, but that's okay. And then, of course, sideboard, we have Winter Orb. Very sweet card, very powerful. Doesn't really have the sort of negative synergy like you would think, especially when you only have 2 Curse Scrolls. So the deck is very mana hungry, but on like the correct board, like they're tapped out, you have like a couple creatures in play. Slamming a Winter Orb will give you a whole bunch of extra attack steps and make it easier to burn them out then, because you don't need to do so much damage with all of your cards because you have all the extra damage, being able to get the free damage from your onboard creatures, you know, that kind of thing. So very cool, very sweet. Winter Orb, definitely a very cool card if you're trying to beat up on those more mana hungry decks. All right, now we have Enchantress, and this is, again, pretty typical Enchantress list. We are splashing red for Words of War, but again, that's not unusual. You know, that's a card we always see in Enchantress a lot of the time, just as a way to kill pretty fast. Sideboard, we have City of Solitude as well as Multani's presence against counter magic. Obviously, multiple cities aren't great, but City plus Multani's presence is great because, like, you're able to. It's a cheaper card, and it's pretty good if like they kill your city, or I guess they can't kill the city in response. But anyways, it is cheaper, much cheaper than City of Solitude, and it's pretty good to get that down because a lot of time it's going to come down to cards and things like that. So yeah, pretty interesting card. I wonder how it worked out, but the rest is pretty typical of what we'll see from an Enchantress list. All right, again, same thing here. Pretty typical Devourer combo deck. Nothing strange here. Um, Fact or fiction, of course, it's definitely a pretty sweet card when you're trying to switch to being more uh, to draw more cards to beat up on the control decks, which is pretty sweet. And of course, Goblin Welder helps you do the more, gives you more resiliency and things like that. So that's pretty sweet. I like that. But everything else, yeah, we're talking pretty stock list. Nothing too weird here. All right, now we get to something pretty cool. So I'll actually link the article that Mike Flores wrote down in the description, but he wrote about his experience and all sorts of other interesting stuff about developing this deck too. Now a lot of it's the same, but there is some really interesting inclusions. Solitary Confinement, he put one main deck, so he would be able to have a card to 2 to 4 against the aggressive decks that they can't beat game 1. So none of the red decks can beat Solitary Confinement game 1. It's basically impossible. Games 2 and 3, it's a bit of a different situation with things like Flaring Pain, Anarchy, or even sometimes, of course, enchantment removal. So that's a really cool card. Then, of course, the main deck Swords to Plowshares plus sideboard Swords to Plowshares lets you lean more into the control role if you want to. And that's really why I like this deck, is because you can do the combo and control thing. You can frantic search like twice, you know, in a row or something, or careful study, then frantic search on turn 3, and then dump all your stuff, and then be able to, if you have like a City of Traders in play, or next turn play a land and then replenish all the stuff back, and that's really sweet. You know, do the whole, and then of course you have the Parallax Tide, Parallax Wave stuff with like Seal of Cleansing, which is cool. Then you have obviously Opalescence plus Parallax Tab plus Parallax Wave. That's a combo. Um, all sorts of good stuff. Of course, the Attunement is lets you draw and then discard, and of course is good with Opalescence and oh my gosh, so much stuff, so much stuff. So definitely really cool here. The sideboard is a lot of really great stuff. We got the Thawing Glaciers probably stands out, but again, when we're talking about what matters in like versus control decks, it is mana. So if we want to adopt a more controlling position, Thawing Glaciers is great, and it has awesome synergy with Frantic Surge. So that's really cool too. Then of course we have, again, the extra swords, Abeyance, of course, against other combo decks, and you can use it on your turn to protect your combo, so that's very sweet. Mana Short, of course, just the one of, might look a little wonky, but you can switch them with the Swords to Plowshares main deck against the control deck, so that's a nice little switch. The FOF and the counter spells, again, when you don't want to focus just on comboing out and you want to adopt a more controlling position, it's very sweet. So I think this is great. I think having this stronger control focus against some decks post-board isn't a bad idea, because the deck already has not fragile at all. It's a very strong deck because, I mean, we got a solid mana base with a lot of basics. We've got a lot of great ramp with Ancient Tomb and City of Traders. We got a lot of card advantage, or I guess Frantic Search with Squeeze, card advantage, and also mana neutral, and can produce mana with Ancient Tomb, and it's also a combo card because Frantic Search, Careful Study, and Attunement dump all your enchantments in your graveyard, and then you can replenish them. But everything just does a bunch of different things, which is sweet, you know. So definitely a big fan of this deck. Definitely a lot of really cool stuff going on here. Like I said, always big fan of this deck. Consistent, powerful, good mana, proactive, can enable switch roles, right? Be combo deck or control deck, basically. And its combo cards are actually still good cards by themselves, you know. So that's pretty sweet. Well, I guess Opalescence is basically dead by itself, more or less, unless you have, you know, other enchantments in play. But yeah, definitely a lot of really great stuff going on here. All right, now we have Parfait Oath. Now we got a lot of really cool stuff going on here. First and foremost, we got the Cunning Wish. Now I'm not a huge, again, I've never played Cunning Wish in Parfait before, but it is good with the Oath of Druids plan because of Funeral Pyre. So against like decks that are creatureless, you can Cunning Wish for Pyre to put a dude into play to trigger Oath, which is pretty great. On the downside, it felt like every time, I mean, when I was playing this deck, it's always very mana hungry, so you really want, it's like a lot of times you don't have time to cast a 3 mana card because you've got so much else going on. So I'm a little skeptical of adding a 3 mana card, and it kind of wonkies up your sideboard, you know, a little bit. I mean, that's a lot of 1-ofs, but interesting stuff. I mean, hey, I guess getting Heroes Reunion is pretty powerful, so yeah, let's see here. Oh yes, the Triskelion, that's a new one. Again, it's a pretty sweet card against, well, anything with creatures that you want to kill. So that's pretty neat, pretty neat. So it's good against weenie decks, which is nice. And then of course, Phantom Neshoba, of course, is a pretty solid finisher as well. A lot of these other things aren't too strange, but Zur's Weirding is very powerful. This is definitely a really great card against the control decks because it can play like a kind of like a lantern control, you know. And as a bonus, it makes Ivory Tower really good because usually Ivory Tower is like pretty bad for the most part against control, unless you get into the super duper late game. Yeah, like Ivory Tower is pretty wonky, but with Zur's Weirding you can lock people out, and Zur's Weirding stops them from drawing the cards that matter against you, and you get to see their hand too, which is really awesome. So yeah, this is, or well, everyone sees everyone's hand, but yeah, Zur's Weirding is definitely really powerful, and definitely a really sweet card, and definitely one I'll have to try. So yeah, really great position for the really great deck for the runner-up position. And now we have Angry Hermit. And of course, this guy opts to play Phyrexian Dreadnought, um, the Dreadnought combo, right, with Stifle and or Vision Charm. That's sweet. It's definitely really good because it helps you dodge like a lot of the hate aimed at Hermit Druid, like think Engineered Plague or something like that. I mean, both of them still die to creature removal, so like Smother or Source to Plowshares. But other than that, it's definitely a nice sort of juke. So that's really sweet. I'm a big fan of that. A lot of really cool stuff going on here, but for the most part, it's just Hermit Druid and or Dreadnought deck, and a lot of these slots are locked in, so you're not going to see a ton of crazy stuff. But nice thing is Sylvan Safekeeper can protect Hermit Druid and or Dreadnought, and of course the Sutru Ghoul as well too. So that's pretty sweet. But yeah, this definitely a really strong deck, especially if people are not respecting graveyards, right? Not playing their crypts and stuff. So yeah, definitely really powerful deck, and certainly not surprising to see it take first place. Very great job. Very great job. And that's it, guys. Rushing through that whole list of decks, just a flurry of decks, one after the other. Very cool, very cool. Big tournament, 100 plus people. Tons of cool stuff going on. Great job to everyone involved. You know, it's a lot of rounds, a lot of Magic to play. You know, a lot of really tough decisions sometimes. You know, so great stuff. Real great tournament. Real great format. Great people. So yeah, there you go. So that's it, guys. So thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.